The sun had just risen over the wide, dry plains, painting the ranch in shades of gold and amber. Dust rose gently in the morning breeze, curling around the old wooden fences and the worn-down barns. The rancher, a tall, rugged man with a weathered face, walked across the field, his boots crunching against the dry earth. He had spent all his life working the land, tending to cattle, repairing fences, and rising before the sun. To him, life was simple but hard, and he believed that nothing came without effort. His mother, however, was very different. She was a small, delicate woman with a sharp mind and a quiet strength. She had raised him after his father passed away, teaching him how to work hard, how to be disciplined, and how to survive in a world that could often be cruel. Over the years, their relationship had grown complicated. While the rancher valued action and practicality above all, his mother had a careful, cautious way of thinking. She often disagreed with him about how things should be done on the ranch, especially when it came to money and property. That morning, tension hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to break. The rancher was in a foul mood, frustrated with the constant arguments and disagreements. He had always believed that the ranch should be run his way, but his mother's advice, though wise, often felt like criticism. She was constantly reminding him of past mistakes and warning him about financial risks. To him, it was exhausting, and he had reached a boiling point. The argument started over something small, as arguments often do. The rancher wanted to sell a piece of land to pay for new equipment, but his mother insisted they hold on to it. She reminded him of the sacrifices the family had made over the years, how each acre had been paid for with hard work and blood, and how selling it might bring short-term gain, but long-term loss. The rancher's face turned red as he shouted back, telling her that she did not understand the realities of modern farming, that she was living in the past, and that her warnings were unnecessary. "You always think you know best," he snapped. "I've worked this land my whole life. I don't need you telling me what to do." His mother's eyes narrowed, and she replied calmly, though her voice carried an edge. "And I've lived longer than you, son. I've seen things you can't even imagine. Sometimes caution is more valuable than action." The words hit him like a slap. The tension escalated quickly, voices rising, echoing across the empty fields. The rancher, in a moment of anger and frustration, made a rash decision that he would later regret. He grabbed the keys to the old truck and threw them to her. "Fine," he shouted. "Go wherever you want. I don't care." Without hesitation, his mother picked up her suitcase, a small but sturdy leather case that had traveled with her for decades. She had always been careful with her belongings, protecting them from harm. But this suitcase was different. Unknown to her son, it carried something of immense value, $1.4 million in cash. Over the years, she had saved, invested, and carefully hidden this money, keeping it a secret even from her own family. To her, it was a safety net, a way to ensure that she would always have some control over her life and future, even if the unexpected happened. She climbed into her car, and with a quiet determination, she started the engine. The rancher watched her leave, a mix of anger and relief in his heart. He wanted her gone, but a small part of him already felt a pang of regret. He shook it off, telling himself that she was stubborn and controlling, and that he was better off handling things on his own. As she drove away, the wind blew her hair across her face, and she felt a strange mix of emotions. She was hurt by her son's harsh words, but she was not afraid. She had faced challenges before, and she knew how to handle herself. The suitcase beside her seemed heavier than normal, but it was a weight she carried with pride. It represented years of careful planning, patience, and resilience. Her journey was not easy. The roads were long and winding, stretching across deserts and farmlands, past small towns and abandoned farms. Each mile brought new challenges: flat tires, wrong turns, and occasional bad weather, but she remained calm and composed. She had always been resourceful, and today was no different. She stopped at a small roadside diner for food, always careful to pay in cash, never revealing the full story of her journey. The waitress gave her a curious look, sensing that this woman was on a mission, but she asked no questions. Meanwhile, back at the rancher was slowly realizing that something was off. He hadn't thought about the suitcase. He had assumed it contained only her personal belongings. But as the day went on, a nagging feeling grew in his chest. He remembered the careful way she had packed it, how she always locked it securely, and how she had guarded it for years. A cold thought ran through his mind. What if there was more in that suitcase than he realized? Hours passed, and the mother continued her journey, always alert, always careful. She avoided main highways, taking back roads and rural routes that allowed her to stay unnoticed. Occasionally, she would stop to refuel, always conscious of who might be watching. She knew that her son's anger was fleeting, but she also knew that money of this kind could attract attention if the wrong person found out. Despite the challenges, she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had turned a moment of conflict into an opportunity to prove her independence. The land, the ranch, and even her son's anger could not control her. She was a woman who had spent her life making smart decisions, and this was another example of her careful planning paying off. The rancher, on the other hand, began pacing the porch of the main house, replaying the morning's argument in his mind. His anger had not faded as he thought it would. Instead, he felt a growing sense of guilt mixed with fear. He realized that he had underestimated his mother, that he had been harsh and impulsive, and that he had no idea what he had let go. The thought of her being out there alone with the mysterious suitcase made his stomach churn. As the sun began to set, the mother reached a small, quiet town. She parked the car behind a line of trees, keeping it hidden from view. She took a deep breath and looked at the suitcase. In that moment, she felt a mix of relief and pride. She had survived the day, handled every obstacle with grace, and kept her secret safe. The journey had reminded her of her strength, her intelligence, and her ability to face life's unexpected challenges. That night, she stayed in a small motel, careful to avoid drawing attention. She ate a simple dinner, paid in cash, and went to bed early. The suitcase remained close by, a silent guardian of her hard-earned wealth. She knew the next day would bring new challenges, but she felt ready. She had outsmarted her son's anger and proved that she could handle anything life threw at her. Back at the rancher could not sleep. He kept thinking about the argument, the suitcase, and the woman who had raised him. For the first time, he began to understand her wisdom, her careful nature, and the strength that he had often overlooked. He wondered if he had been too harsh, too impatient, and too quick to dismiss her advice. In the quiet of the night, with only the wind whispering through the fields, both mother and son faced their own challenges. One was on a journey of independence, courage, and careful planning. The other was left to confront his impulsiveness, guilt, and growing awareness of what he might have lost. The tension between them was far from over, but the events of the day had set the stage for a reckoning, a lesson, and perhaps eventual understanding. The story of that day would be remembered not just for the argument, the suitcase, or the money, but for the quiet strength of a mother who refused to be underestimated, and the awakening of a son who was beginning to understand that wisdom often comes from experience, patience, and respect. The next morning, the mother woke up in her small motel room, sunlight streaming through the thin curtains. The quiet of the town felt peaceful, almost comforting, after the long, stressful day of travel. She opened her suitcase, checked the contents, and smiled softly to herself. The money was still safe, every note accounted for, and the weight of responsibility felt lighter now that she knew she had reached this point unharmed. She had always been careful and meticulous, and today's journey had reminded her of that. She had outsmarted her son's anger and had handled the road, the strangers she met, and the challenges of travel with calm determination. For her, this was not just about the money. It was about proving to herself that age, anger, or family conflict could never break her spirit. She had survived, and she had done so with dignity and intelligence. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the son's anger had faded, replaced by unease and worry. The argument replayed endlessly in his mind. He remembered her calm voice, her sharp eyes, the way she had always managed the ranch and finances carefully. And then, slowly, the realization struck him. He had no idea what was in that suitcase. A cold dread settled in his stomach. He had driven her off in anger, thinking it was a small thing, a temporary spat. But now, uncertainty gnawed at him. He tried to call her, but the phone rang endlessly. She did not answer, as she had planned, keeping her location private and avoiding any calls that might give away her position. He drove around the ranch roads, hoping to catch a glimpse of her car, but it was nowhere to be seen. The thought of her being out there, alone, carrying something valuable, made him restless and anxious. Back in the town, the mother planned her next steps carefully. She knew she had to be cautious, even though the road ahead was now safer. She wanted to reach a secure location, one she trusted completely, where she could ensure the money remained untouched. She decided to travel slowly, stopping only when necessary, and avoiding any attention. Even small towns could be unpredictable, and she had learned long ago that discretion was the best protection. As she drove through quiet streets and winding back roads, she reflected on her life. She thought about the years she had worked, the sacrifices she had made, and the wisdom she had gained. Every decision she had taken had been deliberate, carefully measured. And yet, she realized, even in her careful life, she could never predict the emotions of those closest to her own son. In particular, family could be both a source of strength and a source of conflict. She had learned to navigate both, relying on her judgment and calm nature. Hours passed, and she arrived at a small, secluded safe house she had kept for emergencies. Hidden among trees and far from busy roads, it was the perfect place to rest and prepare for what came next. She parked her car, carried the suitcase inside, and locked the door behind her. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe fully, to relax, and to enjoy the feeling of safety. She had survived the journey, and the money was secure. The rancher, meanwhile, had started to feel the weight of regret pressing down on him. He wandered through the ranch, staring at the empty spaces where his mother's presence had always been felt. He thought of her cooking, her guidance, her patience, and even her criticisms. They were part of what had shaped him into the man he was. And now, in the silence, he realized how harshly he had treated her, how little he had understood her wisdom. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, he made a decision. He would go and find her, but he had to be careful. He could not simply storm into her life again with anger or pride. He needed to approach with respect, humility, and patience. His first step was to recall every conversation they had had, every warning she had given, every lesson she had taught. He began to understand that her anger and frustration in life had always come from a place of care and foresight. Meanwhile, the mother was not unaware of her son's nature. She knew he would be worried, that he would start searching for her soon enough. But she remained calm. She had always believed in teaching lessons through experience rather than words alone. Perhaps this journey, both hers and his, would offer him a chance to reflect on his actions, to understand her better, and to grow in ways he could not, while blinded by anger. A few days later, the rancher arrived in the same town where his mother had stayed. He found the small diner where she had eaten before and asked carefully, without revealing too much. The locals were friendly but cautious, and nobody gave him more than vague directions. He realized that tracking her would not be easy, but he was determined. He had learned, perhaps for the first time, the depth of his mother's independence, intelligence, and careful planning. The mother, aware that he might come looking for her, prepared herself. She wanted to meet him, but not in anger or conflict. She had carried the suitcase across long distances, faced the road alone, and ensured her safety. Now, it was time for a meeting based on understanding, reconciliation, and reflection. She knew that anger could destroy relationships, but calm conversation could heal them. When the rancher finally found her safe house, he hesitated outside the door. He saw her through the window, arranging her belongings, calm and composed, and the sight struck him with a wave of guilt and admiration. He knocked lightly, and she turned, her face showing a mixture of surprise and quiet authority. "Mother," he said, his voice low, carrying both remorse and relief. I'm sorry. I didn't understand. I didn't think." She looked at him carefully, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "Son," she said softly, "we have both made mistakes. But now we need to think clearly, not out of anger." He nodded, feeling the weight of his actions pressing on him. "I should never have driven you off. I was angry. Yes, but I see now that I was wrong. You've always been right. In many ways, I didn't appreciate." The mother smiled gently. "It is not about being right or wrong. It is about understanding each other, respecting each other, and learning from life's challenges. That suitcase," she said, nodding toward it, "is not just money. It is a symbol of planning, patience, and caution. Something you will understand better one day." For the first time in a long while, the rancher felt a sense of humility. He realized that his mother's strength was not in her size or her voice, but in her intelligence, experience, and careful decision-making. He had underestimated her for years, and now he saw clearly the wisdom she carried, silently, in everything she did. They sat together, talking late into the evening. The conversation was calm, reflective, and honest. They discussed the past without anger, the argument without blame, and the journey without fear. Each word built a bridge of understanding between them, slowly repairing the rift that had grown over the years. The mother explained her reasoning behind the money, how she had saved it, and why she had kept it secret. The rancher listened carefully, absorbing every detail, and began to see the foresight, patience, and care that had gone into each decision. It was a lesson he would never forget. By the time the night had fully settled, both felt a quiet sense of peace. The rancher had learned humility and respect. The mother had proven her strength and wisdom, and the bond between them, though tested, had grown stronger. It was not just about money, land, or arguments. It was about understanding, love, and the unspoken lessons that life sometimes forces us to learn. As they prepared for the next day, they both knew that the ranch, the land, and life's challenges would continue. But now, they would face them together, with respect, trust, and a renewed sense of family. The argument, the suitcase, and the journey had taught them both a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the greatest wealth lies not in money, but in patience, understanding, and the quiet strength of those we love. And so, under the vast, star-filled sky, mother and son sat together, ready to face the future not as adversaries, but as family, wiser, calmer, and more united than ever before.